Hello, everyone. How's that? How's the sound? Are you getting microphone sound, or is it clear? Okay. This microphone is very. How's that? Is that okay? No, still not much. How's now? Still no? Is it? It is on. All right. How about now? A little bit more. One more notch. Now we feeling good? Okay. Thank you for your help in setting these sound levels. I know the sound check is traditionally done earlier in the day, but we like to include the audience. Welcome to the Visiting Writers Series at Carthage. This is the first reading, or the second reading of the spring already. We're off to quite a start. Christina Rodriguez gave a scholarly talk / workshop reading on the first day of classes. And we'll have several more events coming up, so keep your eyes out for those. The next one on the schedule is April 4th. Jordan Dunn and Lisa Fishman will read. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Arts and Humanities Division, the English Department, for supporting living writers at Carthage. And I'm very happy to welcome back Adam Ross after, we think, 4 years. Which will give you a sense of the scale of the project that he'll share some of with us. We heard some early stages of a novel that is now finished and fairly soon to appear, called Play World, so look for that in the future. And for people who are setting out on writing fiction, as I know some of the students who met with Adam earlier, it's interesting to think about working on something for 4 years and how much the world changes and you change and the writing will change over a time like that. Adam's debut novel, Mr. Peanut, was a 2010 New York Times notable book and was named one of the best books of the year by The New Yorker, the Philadelphia Inquirer, The New Republic, and The Economist. Ladies and Gentlemen, his short story collection, included the story In the Basement, a finalist for the BBC International Story Prize. He was the Mary Ellen von der Heyden, it was a pleasure to say that, Fellow in Fiction at the American Academy in Berlin, as well as a Hodder Fellow at Princeton University. He's also the editor of the Sewanee Review, and we'll have at the end of the reading, we'll take a little break for refreshments, and then the seminar in creative writing chapbook class will stay, and anybody else that would like to stay, and we'll talk about fiction writing, but also about editing and being the editor of a nationally important magazine like the Sewanee Review. So please join us for that if you would like, or if you're in my class. In the meantime, please welcome Adam Ross.
Okay, can everyone hear me? It's good? Okay. First of all, thank you all so much for coming out. It's my understanding it's gale force winds out there, or getting gale-ish. So I really appreciate it. It's a great turnout. I really appreciate that. I'd also like to quickly thank John Swallow and Cameron Swallow, President John Swallow and his wife Cameron. John really changed my life by doing me the honor of allowing me to take over the Sewanee Review, and Cameron welcomed me into her home, like the orphan on the mountain that I was at the time. They're just the best people, and what I'd just like to say really briefly, I mentioned this a little bit at dinner last night. When I was appointed editor of the Sewanee Review, it was at a time of a long editorship that preceded me. As with a lot of positions in any university where there's someone who's esteemed and in a long-held position, there's lots of factionalism, and John made an out-of-the-box hire, and when you hear about people or get to see people like Sadiq Fofana, who are now enjoying so much success, people like that get their start at places like the Sewanee Review. That's where Sadiq got his start, and I could go on about that, but the knock-on effects of taking risks and affirming your vision are, I think, very hard to argue with after the fact. It's the people who stick to their guns in the midst of the mess that end up being great leaders, and John is one of those people, so thank you, John. Cameron is not here for long, so I'm going to dive right in. She's got band practice. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to read from my novel Playworld. I'm going to just read from the beginning and pretty much halfway through the first chapter. If you guys are loving it and you want to be like, keep going, I'll keep going. I'm not offended if you're like, okay, thanks, applause, good, okay. And then we can take questions. It's cool. Okay, I won't take it personally. So because it's the beginning, it needs no setup, okay? Playworld. In the fall of 1980, when I was 14, a friend of my parents named Naomi Shaw fell in love with me. She was 36, a mother of two, and married to a wealthy man. Like so many things that happened to me that year, it didn't seem strange at the time. 2 decades later, when I finally told my mother we were on Long Island taking a walk on the beach, she stopped, stunned, and said, "But she was such an ugly woman." The remark wasn't as petty as it sounds. If I was aware of it then, it neither repulsed me nor affected my feelings for Naomi. It was just a thing I took for granted, like the color of her hair. Wiry and ashen, it had the shading, but not the shimmer of pigeon feathers. Naomi kept it long, so that it fell past her shoulders, a witch's width whose texture was dry as tinder. I knew it by touch, for my face was often buried in it. Only later did I wonder if she considered herself unattractive, because she always wore sunglasses as if to hide her face, large gold frames with blue-tinted prescription lenses. When we were driving together, which was often that year, she'd allowed these to slide down her nose and then look at me over their bridge. She might have considered this pose winning, but it was more likely to see me better. Her mouth often hung slightly open. Her lower teeth were uneven, and her tongue pressed against them, brined in her spittle, which always tasted of coffee. Naomi's car was a silver Mercedes sedan, 300 SD, along with turbo diesel nickel-plated on the back, that made a deep cetacean hum when she drove. The interior, enormous in my mind's eye, was tricked out with glossy wood paneling and white leather, back seats so wide and legroom so ample, it made the driver appear to be far away. It was in this car that Naomi and I talked most often. We'd park, and then she'd lean across the armrest to press her cheek to mine, and I'd sometimes allow her to kiss me. Other times, we'd move to the back, lying there with Naomi, her nose nuzzled to my neck. I'd stare at the ceiling's dotted headliner until the pattern seemed to detach and drift like a starred sky. This car was her prized possession, and like many commuters, she had turned the machine into an extension of her body. Her left thumb lightly hooked the wheel at 8 o'clock when traffic was moving, her fingertips sliding to 11 when it was slow. She preferred to sit slightly reclined, her hand spread on her inner thigh, though after she lost her pinky that summer, and even after being fitted with a prosthesis, she kept it tucked away. I was worried you'd think it was disgusting, she said, the digit hidden between the seat and her hip. She bought herself a diamond ring to hide the seam, and for the most part, the likeness was uncanny, but at certain angles, you could tell the cuticle's line was too smooth, the nail's pale crescent too creamy to match the others. I was fascinated by it, though my curiosity wasn't morbid. I was a child actor, you see, a student of all forms of dissembling, and had long ago found my greatest subject to be adults. Chapter 1, a crisis of confidence. We were at the 40th wedding anniversary celebration of Dr. Barr and his wife, Lynn. The Barrs lived in Great Neck. We'd driven from Manhattan just before the sun was beginning to set. Crossing the 59th Street Bridge, Roosevelt Island's towers flashed, the shadows of Manhattan's buildings just starting to climb their faces. But by the time we arrived, the sky was a purplish pink shade like the inside of a Nautilus, with plenty of light for my brother Orrin to name the make and model of every car parked in the driveway, ending with Dr. Barr's Cadillac Seville. It was a vehicle whose cachet we associated with the bold gilt letters on the door of his Gramercy Park office, but the high esteem with which we held him did not change the fact that in our house, and on nights like these, he was known only by his first name, Elliot. He was my father's best friend and our family's psychologist. All of us consulted with him. Mom midweek, Dad with my brother Orrin and me on Saturday mornings. My father had been Elliot's patient since before he met my mother, she the year after they married. Orrin had only recently started therapy because his grades were sliding, but I'd been seeing Elliot since I was 5, after a family death I'd caused. More on that trauma coming soon. It never struck me as odd, the thinness of the membrane between patient and friend, between husband and wife, brother and brother, perhaps because he had been such an ubiquitous presence for so long as I could remember. If anything, it made Elliot seem more sagely, his mind like an IBM computer, able, as I imagined he was, to keep so many secrets from 4 people without judging each as we sat across from him in his office's supermodern egg chair. The Barrs' home was so packed with guests, it made me feel like we were standing in a closet. All that fabric, the men's blazers and the women's wraps and scarves, muffling the music as we moved through zones of perfume, scotch, and cigarette smoke. Orrin and I made repeat trips to the buffet. The salmon was soon only a head and a tail. The crudité soon only parsley and cauliflower florets. Watched some of the giants in the guest room. Elliot had one of the biggest TVs I'd ever seen, but the reception was terrible. And then checked out Elliot's collection of masks mounted in their dining room's display case, whose glass Orrin tried to open. Arrow-headed shamans, saber-toothed kabuki demons, and our favorite from the Chinese opera, their swirled designs like superhero masks decorated with spirograph and as colorful as pachinko machines. But having exhausted ways of relieving our boredom, we split up. This was when Naomi and I ended up alone together for the first time. She was sitting on the living room sofa. I sat on the coffee table, facing her. I was telling her about my acting career, and she had asked me about playing Roy Scheider's son in The Talent Effect. What was it like working with him, she said. He was nice, I said. Roy and I ate lunch together my first day on the set, and when I opened my soda, it sprayed his face, so he angled his can's mouth toward mine, popped the tab, and got me back. And Joan Collins, she said, she's pretty in person? She is, I said. The one day during makeup, the hairdresser stuck a teasing comb behind her ear and lifted a wig clear off her head. Naomi found this hysterical. She snorted when she laughed, pressing her fingernails to her chest. Between her rings and bracelets and her gold earrings shaped like cymbals, she clinked like a Newton's cradle whenever she moved. She was a Great Neck Jewess. She had the classic up-island accent, one I could mimic on command. A vaudeville act this kid is, I said, imitating her. A regular prodigy. She was wide-hipped. She wore sheer stockings beneath a wool skirt. Her blouse was a tailored silk, open at the neck, which revealed when she leaned forward a peak of collarbone and the lacy spray of her brassiere. On her cheek was a light brown birthmark, its perimeter ragged-edged. The texture and color of a burnt egg white. Maybe it was the heat of Naomi's attention that got me so excited, or the odd way we sat hidden in plain sight, how the party, by now well into its swing, domed us in a kind of privacy. But it was at this point I did something so remarkable and fateful, I still don't completely understand it. She asked me about the Saturday morning TV series I'd been doing for several seasons, the one, she said, that adults watch too. She snapped her fingers, trying to conjure the title, as if from the narrow space between us. And when she laid her hand on my shoulder and let her head fall, I could smell her perfume. The Nuclear Family, she said, remembering, and then leaned back to clap once. It was more spoof than superhero show, vaguely educational. Each episode organized around a different scientific concept. And exposure to radiation had altered the DNA of my character, Peter Proton, along with his parents, Ellen Electron and Nate Neutron. Before we fought bad guys, we'd summon our powers by yelling, "Split up!" After 3 Mile Island had nearly melted down, everyone called the show prophetic. Naomi wanted to know how we did the special effects, the atomic eye blasts and flying sequences. I was explaining chroma keying to her, how we'd hang from wires in front of green screen when I suddenly stopped. My expression changed. I turned away and through my nose forced all the breath from my chest. It was a trick I'd learned in order to make myself tear up. "Sweetie," she asked, "are you all right?" "I'm going to tell you a secret," I said, "but you have to swear to not tell anyone." On one lid, I had a tear, perfectly balanced. It was like palming a beach ball in the wind. And when I looked at Naomi again, I let it fall down my cheek. "Will you swear?" I said. Naomi looked over her shoulder and then leaned forward and whispered, "Of course, honey." I told her I'd lost my virginity to Liz, the director's assistant. She was 24. On set, she was everything from gopher to script girl, and because I was extra busy once school had started, what with the tighter shooting schedule I explained, and my homework on top of that, I'd struggled to memorize my lines. She and I often rehearsed together, and for several weeks straight, we'd found ourselves alone in my dressing room. One night, while going over a scene, it just happened. We've been secretly dating ever since. "She's worried she'll get into trouble," I said. "Because of your age, you mean?" "You're the first person I've told." Naomi shook her head in amazement. "Is it wrong," I asked, "to be having relations with her?" she said. "To like older women so much." And while Naomi considered how to answer, struggling through the fog of these details to process my bald-faced lie, I leaned forward to kiss her. This was a ridiculous gesture, made more absurd by my open mouth, tongue-first nonchalance, plus my disregard for her status and our surroundings, the fact that she was married, for example, or that guests were standing 5 feet away. I briefly pressed my lips to hers. It's possible she'd never moved so fast in her life, rocking back to laugh at my ludicrous bravado, while simultaneously pressing her fingertips to my shoulder. "Griffin," she said, "you are something." I shrugged and thanked her for the talk and went to go find my brother. Orrin was always worth seeking out at these parties because he was a fearless explorer of other people's rooms. Closed doors meant nothing to him. Closets were never off limits. Bureaus begged to be opened, whether they belonged to strangers or to our parents, whose wall-length dresser he regularly raided with abandon. He found treasures there, coin rolls stacked like Lincoln logs, reserved for the basement laundry machines, but which we skimmed to play pinball and Missile Command at Stanley's stationery store. My father's dog tags, their gunmetal stamped with risen letters like Braille and revealing his given name, Hertzberg. When Dad became an actor, he changed it to Hurt. Buried beneath Mom's panties, Orrin had also uncovered her diaphragm. Waiting until I was present to pop its plastic container, he stretched its dome with his fingers to a near porous transparency. "I think it's a yarmulke," he said. For what? I said, the rain? I sealed its edges over my lips and blew as hard as I could. Plus, I added after it failed to inflate, Mom isn't even Jewish. At the Barr's house, I found Orrin in the driveway with my father and Naomi's husband, Sam Shaw. One gull wing of his Bentley's hood was raised so Orrin could admire the engine. My father was already seated shotgun. When he spotted me, he made a hand-turning, hurry up wave. Join us, Sam said, clicking the hood's panel back in place and walking toward the driver's side door. We're taking her for a spin. Sam Shaw made a powerful impression standing beside his gorgeous machine. He was dark-skinned, Pakistani on his mother's side, I'd learned later that year, with a head of luxuriant black hair that added at least an inch to his height. He was full-lipped, his fluffy mustache as dense as his brows, and his glasses had such thick lenses his eyes seemed to float in them. That he was odd-looking didn't diminish him in the least. To use an expression from back then, his charisma was serious. Chin up, he watched me as I approached and then extended his arm toward the back seat. I always thought that Mr. Shaw's clothes were fantastic. This evening's blazer was a buttery chestnut tweed, his silk tie as brilliantly colored as a tropical fish. His loafers' tassels looked like tiny squid dipped in expensive chocolate. Shoes to shirt, these materials seemed to gather the fading light to them, as did the Bentley's oyster gray paint. Everyone buckled up, Sam asked. He pulled on a pair of fingerless leather driving gloves, perforated above the clasp, which he snapped closed. I noticed my father admiring. Sam started the car, and the needles jumped. He eased the Bentley out of its space, as if it were a boat motoring through a no-wake zone. But the moment we were on the road, he gave it gas, and the engine sang. Orrin was thrilled. He immediately pulled down the tray table, an act I copied. We could see our reflections ripple in the molten grain of the polished walnut. Orrin leaned forward, looking over Sam's shoulder to regard the dash. The white-on-black gauges had stenciled abbreviations as baffling as a cockpit's instruments, the car's major operations adjusted by silver knobs that looked pleasurable to touch. The only visible sign of wear surrounded the ignition switch, the key having chipped away the veneer each time it had missed the slot, but to me, such scarring was a sign of use. It meant only one thing. Sam drove this car everywhere. What's the make and model? My father asked. This is a 1960 S2 Continental. It's beautifully appointed, my father said. He often made such statements in his baritone, projected from his trained diaphragm, and the usual effect was that his words somehow attained a gravid authority that masked their obviousness. Earlier, I'd overheard him talking to some of Elliot and Lynn's guests of the Iran hostage crisis. He said, it's a very, very complex situation. And his audience vigorously nodded their heads, as if by saying so, he'd unraveled the Gordian knot of Middle Eastern geopolitics. But Sam had no reaction to his comment, and this made my father fidget more than normal. He ran his hand along the door's wood grain, and then checked his fingertips for dust. He turned the radio on, off, and after adjusting the dial, left it on, as if this were his car, and he wanted Sam to get a load of the sound system. Where'd you get it? My father asked. In Cape Cod, Sam said. It must have been expensive. It was sitting uncovered in the owner's driveway, turning into a hunk of rust. A bargain, then, my father observed. Sam leaned toward him while keeping his eyes on the road. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. The restoration was what really cost me. We made our way out of the residential part of Great Neck and onto a 4-lane road. Freer now, Sam stepped on it again, and the car accelerated effortlessly. My father pointed to the speedometer. Ever gotten it up to 200, he asked. Orrin shielded his eyes and shook his head miserably. Those are kilometers. Dad, who liked to hurry past mistakes, shot him a look. Still, he said to Orrin, and then to Sam, it's close. Orrin leaned over Sam's shoulder. So it tops out at what, Mr. Shaw? 120? Very good, Sam replied. And no, he told Dad. It's a V8, Orrin continued, amazing me. The S1 was a straight 6. I see you know your automobiles, Sam said. Orrin shrugged and then sank back into his seat, crossing his arms, wearing a pained expression as he watched the trees whip by. How, he seemed to be wondering, am I ever going to get rich enough to own wheels like this? I know a little, he said. I could tell Dad was uncomfortable in the presence of Sam's material success, which baffled me. He sang on Broadway. His voice was all over TV. Give, he said, to the United Negro College Fund, because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. He had nothing to prove to me. What do you think of American cars, Dad asked Sam. We had just bought my grandfather's Buick LeSabre for $1, an amount Grandpa had demanded to make the transaction, in his words, official. Not much, Sam said. Elliot certainly loves his Cadillac, my father observed. Once again, Sam leaned toward my father. Even Dr. Barr has lapses in judgment. While Orrin and I were recovering from this heresy, my father's voice came on the radio, his commercial for Schlitz. It was suddenly obvious to me why he turned it on in the first place. Orrin was so mortified, he hid his face behind Sam's seat, while I, being the more dutiful son, exclaimed, Dad, it's you! Sam raised the volume. You only go around once in life, said my father, so you have to grab all the gusto you can. Sam laughed, delighted. Dad shrugged like it was nothing. You drive a Bentley, he seemed to be saying. I am the voice of malt liquor. A moment later, Sam asked, how do they pay you for that? What do you mean? Is it a one-time thing, Sam said? You do the commercial, get a check, and you're done? Not exactly, my father said. He sat up straight, then pinched his thumb and index finger as if to make a fine point. They also pay you for a 13-week cycle. After that, if they want to renew the commercial, they pay you again. He sat back and crossed his arms, satisfied. Sam appeared to do a quick calculation. So during that period, they could play the ad 1 million times, and you wouldn't get an extra cent. My father opened his mouth and then closed it. In theory, yes. Sam smiled, blinking. Someone's union needs to renegotiate. My father hated to imagine getting ripped off, but he took Sam's observation as a more personal affront. He suddenly also felt underappreciated. Now it was he who faced the window to watch the world unspool past him. I'll talk to them, he replied, as if his SAG and after reps were just waiting for his call. He was distracted now, but when we took a sharp curve and Sam accelerated through its apex, he managed to step back into character. The handling is just remarkable, my father said. Yes, said Sam, but it's nothing like my Ferrari GT. You have a GT Lusso, my brother asked? That's the rarest car they've ever made. It's a 365 GT, Sam corrected, then rolled his eyes at my father. I'm not that rich. Is it red or black, Orrin asked. My dear boy, Sam said, tilting the rearview mirror so he could look my brother in the eye. I think we both know the Ferrari only comes in one color. Confused, Orrin said, what's that? Past. I'll stop there.